Nuclear policy. Hello. The number of unemployed in Germany has approached 3 million. Just over the summer, the figure increased by almost 70,000. The UK is closing factories, Estonia is cutting social benefits, and Ireland is plummeting at record speed. A wave of protests and social discontent. European leaders don't care about people, and political ambitions outweigh common sense. By spending billions on the war in Ukraine, the state beacons are slowly sinking. The scale of the crisis right now.
Putin.
So, let's start with the Baltics. Estonia is seriously cutting social benefits. Defense spending is decided to increase to 5% of GDP, and NATO has sacrificed the social sphere. Childcare benefits are being cut. Sick leave payments are decreasing. And not only that,
the authorities will cancel the €200 allowance for pensioners living in nursing homes. They will also lose payments for a dependent spouse. Due to defense spending, taxes are also expected to increase. Pensioners will lose 1 pension per year. Many vulnerable categories of citizens will lose their legal benefits by 2026.
Let's move to Belgium and Brussels. Workers seized the local Audi plant and confiscated 200 cars. The entrances and exits of the factory are blocked with burning tires. The reason? The company recently announced the closure of production and layoffs. The plant employed 3,000 people.
The economic situation in Belgium and other EU countries has worsened. It started to deteriorate during the coronavirus crisis and continued after the war in Ukraine and the subsequent energy crisis. Historically, Belgium is a country of strikes. The Belgian people are very emotional. They quickly take to the streets when they are unhappy. But recently these strikes have become more frequent. In fact, every weekend in Brussels, 70 to 100,000 people gather. You could say the people are somewhat held captive by the current government.
Ireland has set a record for a steep decline. Industrial production fell by 34% last year.
So the country lost a third of its production in just 1 year. It sounds as if the fighting is not in another part of the continent, but directly in Dublin. But unfortunately, it's a sad fact. Industrial production in the entire Eurozone is gradually declining.
Fate! It's hard to believe, but the auto industry is collapsing in Germany, one of the pillars of the economy. Volkswagen announced the possible closure of 2 plants for the first time in 90 years. 110,000 employees could be out on the street. The last time the auto giant made a profit was 2 years ago. The CEO is saddened. We are forced to cut costs.
Economic conditions have become even harsher, and new players are entering the European market. Germany, as a business location, is losing its attractiveness in terms of competitiveness.
Revenues have fallen, expenses have risen, including logistics, energy prices have skyrocketed. Cheap Russian gas is a thing of the past. Keeping up with China and the US in electric car production is getting harder. Nuclear power plants are being shut down. They believe that wind turbines and solar panels can sustain the economy. But everything is getting more expensive, and the government is full of incompetent people. Bloomberg is even more pessimistic. The forecast is extremely alarming. Europe will face a prolonged crisis due to the closure of car factories.
Last year, a third of the plants of the 5 largest car manufacturers in Europe BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Stellantis, Renault, and Volkswagen were underutilized and produced less than half of the cars they were capable of.
The threat of plant closures in Europe has increased in recent years due to labor shortages, leading to higher labor costs and rising energy costs amid the conflict in Ukraine. If the situation does not change, it will hit the region's economy hard. The automotive industry accounts for more than 7% of the European Union's GDP and over 13 million jobs. Car assembly plants often serve as anchors, providing work for many businesses, from engine parts suppliers and transport companies to bakeries, delivering food to staff cafeterias.
Hundreds of other businesses could be affected. Michelin announced the closure of 3 of its German plants. The largest chemical company BASF is shutting down. The leading real estate construction company Silberbaum declared insolvency. 70 major construction projects in Germany have been frozen.
The corporation oversees 14 companies building real estate in 30 German cities. With 70 projects frozen, the economic damage is expected to run into hundreds of millions of euros.
The shipping company Boxtegel filed for bankruptcy. As a result, another 1,000 people lost their jobs. The company Erwin Lutz, which made technical springs for cars, also went bankrupt. In the first half of 2024, 11,000 companies filed for bankruptcy. Huge thanks to Boxtegel, to the US allies.
About 67% of German real sector enterprises are relocating their production facilities outside Germany. The most active in leaving are representatives of mechanical engineering, industrial goods manufacturers, and car builders, according to Deloitte. Hundreds of other large businesses do not want to operate under high energy prices and a deteriorating investment climate in Germany. Business that has been engaged in real production in Germany for many years. Small and medium-sized businesses are also leaving. Economists believe this will severely impact Germany's tax base.
Workers' protests, including against such cynical exchanges. In their media statements, Volkswagen's management is silent about moving all machines and robots to the US. For this, the giant even canceled the employment guarantee program for employees. It had been in place for 30 years.
Irish journalist Che Booz stated on social media X that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is single-handedly destroying one of the country's main engines, Volkswagen. Anyone who knows cars knows that Volkswagen is almost impossible to destroy. This idiot is managing to wipe it off the face of the earth single-handedly.
No jobs, no people. Meanwhile, people are starting to flee Germany in search of a better life. According to official government statistics, up to 300,000 highly qualified specialists leave Germany every year. The main destinations are Australia, Japan, and again the USA. Qualified people are leaving because here you can't achieve the same standard of living with your profession.
As you can, for example, in Canada, Australia, or other European countries.
Well, I know people who are moving to Russia and Belarus.
So the brain drain and the emigration of German citizens are increasing every year, while the influx of people coming to Germany.
They don't speak German, they don't have an education, and they can't replace those who are leaving. And this, of course, further weakens economic power. The victims of deindustrialization are increasing. On the map of Germany, ghost towns may soon appear. Ghost towns. In the once prosperous Germany, real depressed areas are already emerging. Like this Thuringian village of Karlsdorf.
Bus stops look abandoned.
In the village itself, there are no shops, no bars, not even doctors. Despite the fact that the population here is considered true middle class.
But the only rise they experience is climbing this hill.
The problem lies in the steps our leadership is taking.
And since they don't choose us with Germany, we don't choose them in return.
While NATO fights Russia with Ukraine's hands, Europe is falling deeper into the abyss of its absurd decisions. By imposing sanctions at the behest of the White House, the EU continues to kill its economy to please the overseas boss. where major European brands are relocating.
The destruction of the Nord Streams by the Biden administration or its intermediaries simply kills the German economy. And this is the largest economy in Europe, far ahead of the others. Therefore, the consequences of what is essentially an attack by one NATO country on another are felt throughout Europe. And it's just madness, complete madness. This war affects everyone, possibly except Russia in the long term.
Americans manipulate Europe as they wish. In the post-war period, they reconciled Europeans with each other to jointly oppose the Soviet Union. Now they are pitting the EU against Russia. The main goal is to minimize Moscow's potential. And Beijing, which hinders Washington in the struggle for world dominance.
One of the most powerful economies in Europe, now it is under a double blow. On one hand, it is negatively affected by anti-Russian sanctions imposed at the behest of overseas. On the other hand, the US is actively pressuring, aiming to destroy the German economy and pull promising production to America.
A decline in almost all key sectors of the German economy. For example, orders for heavy industry enterprises have fallen to a 5-year low. Given the structure, this will lead to a decline in other industries. Germany's entry into recession has been officially confirmed by Eurostat. GDP is declining for the second consecutive quarter. We see that we are sliding into the largest economic depression in the last 100 years.
While people are being thrown out on the street, the German government plans to continue helping Kyiv. Germany is the second largest supplier of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine after the US. Berlin promises to allocate 28 billion euros, 4 of them next year alone.
As always, ordinary people become victims of absurd actions. But the opinion of the German authorities does not interest them, even during elections. Dissatisfied with the decline in living standards, Germans vote for other politicians who will listen to them. But in the 21st century, it seems they have no voice. Elections can be rigged. The victim was the popular Alternative for Germany.
But European democracy is a delicate matter. The reaction to the AfD's victory was immediate. Computer glitch, recount of votes, and it's done. Alternative for Germany loses one mandate and blocks the minority, which would really allow them to influence German politics.
Let's continue our journey through old, but not very good Europe. The UK economy, which is called one of the main beneficiaries of the war in Ukraine, is also not doing well.
The UK is the only major economy that the International Monetary Fund predicts will shrink this year. Inflation continues to reduce wages, exacerbating the long-standing decline in living standards. Supply chains remain fragile, and the country is experiencing the strongest wave of strikes in the last 30 years.
The cascade of strikes for the British began back in April, when the train drivers' union refused to carry passengers. During the disputes, 100 million trips were cancelled. No final agreement was reached.
The decline of the industrial giant British Steel began with the strike of the factory workers. In 2023, the corporation shut down the coke oven plant in Scunthorpe. 260 jobs lost. But today, officials say the main plant with 2,500 employees is at risk.
Analysts believe that the proposal to implement green initiatives costing over £1 billion was the final blow to the metallurgical giant. As a result, London dropped out of the top 10 countries by industrial potential. The irony is that Russia took its place.
Industrial potential is calculated using a formula that sums the value of fixed assets, labor costs, technology costs, and information costs. Experts calculated that last year the UK produced goods and services worth $259 billion, while France produced $265 billion, Italy $283 billion, and Russia $287 billion. And this is despite the fact that a quarter of a century ago, the British were among the top 5 most powerful industrial nations on the planet.
Let's, as a great nation, endure short-term suffering for long-term benefit. With this quote, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confidently made history.
With such rhetorical wonders, the Prime Minister blamed all policy failures on the previous government. In the same speech, Starmer mentioned that the budget had a £22 billion deficit. Where did this hole come from? The politician did not say.
Meanwhile, prisoners are being released early in the UK. Firstly, due to overcrowded prisons. Secondly, there is no money to maintain the criminals.
According to the BBC, about 1,750 offenders were released under an emergency plan by the Ministry of Justice to address prison overcrowding. The plan aims to free up to 5,500 places.
The number of prisoners in British prisons has reached a record high of over 88,000 people. According to emergency plans, offenders sentenced to less than 5 years will now be released after serving 40% of their term.
Europe has changed. Instead of respect for the individual, there is a cancel culture. Instead of freedom of speech, there is bullying and labeling. Instead of entrepreneurial freedom, there is tax and pseudo-environmental pressure on businesses. Talking about religion, especially after the opening of the Olympics in Paris, and even more so about family values, is simply embarrassing.
There is no money in the United Kingdom, and London has touched the sacred American weapons. The program to purchase the famous F-35 aircraft is expected to be postponed for several years, or possibly cancelled altogether.
It's no secret that we are shooting ourselves in the foot.
By boycotting Russia and some other countries, we lack energy resources.
We buy expensive energy resources somewhere and through someone.
And thus, everything becomes more expensive for us. And it will get worse. Austerity policies mean that winter bills will get heavier. These are not our guesses, but the words of the same Prime Minister in Parliament. The word social will disappear in Britain.
The Prime Minister's decision to ban electricity rationing will hit the poorest and pensioners hard. The annual heating allowance of £300 will be cancelled for everyone without exception.
And this situation is not only in Germany and the UK. The symptoms are the same for everyone. Sanctions, migrants, endless funding of Ukraine. Even France is lagging behind. In 2023, the number of bankruptcies exceeded 55,000.
Bankruptcies mostly affected small and medium-sized enterprises with up to 250 employees. Among large companies with more than 250 employees, only 57 closed in 2023, but this is twice as many as the previous year. The restaurant and hotel business suffered the most, with a 44.6% increase compared to 2022, as well as the information and communication technology sector, with a 44.4% increase.
A sharp drop in income of about 20% is already making the French talk about removing Macron and lifting sanctions. There is a feeling that the French are simply tired of the endless clowning at the top. Hence the failures of Macron and his team in the last elections.
Sanctions against Russia must be lifted, says Florian Philippot, leader of the Patriots Party. He stated that there was a sharp collapse in production in France, then blamed the sanctions against Russia, the European Union, the Euro, and the policies of French President Emmanuel Macron for undermining the French economy. Anti-Russian sanctions are killing us with skyrocketing energy prices. The EU, the Euro, and politicians are killing us. Macronism is killing us, wrote Philippot.
And we took the three main economies of Western Europe as a basis. Population exodus from the Baltics, unemployment in Italy, inflation in Spain. We will surely show all this. Because there too, the numbers, events, and situations with people sometimes reach absurdity. It remains only to state that the old world which many dreamed of, and which opponents so lured Belarus with, indeed existed, but today it has sunk under the rubble of the foolish and thoughtless policies of its leaders. Goodbye.